Hey, what's up, everyone? So in this video, I want to talk to you about why I think it's important for you to stand out as a developer. And this advice is really geared towards junior developers and people looking to get their first job or maybe their second job in tech. You're kind of just starting out early on in your career. The problem is that, especially when you're first starting out, you don't have a lot of experience. Your resume pretty much looks exactly like everyone else's resume. And the projects that most, junior developers and early devs have in their portfolios, they all pretty much look exactly the same too. And the problem with that though is that if you look like everyone else, you are going to get the same results as everyone else, which means you're not going to really get very far. And you really have to look at this from the perspective of your potential employer and the people who are going to be reviewing your resume and your portfolio. You have to ask yourself, why should this person hire me over someone else? Like, what is it about my experience? What is it about these projects or the things that you're presenting to this person, to your employer? Why should they choose you over someone else? And sometimes, I've seen this personally, sometimes you have dozens, if not even hundreds of resumes. And that's not an exaggeration saying hundreds. I'll give you some personal experience how I know that a little later on in this video. But if you have dozens of resumes that are all junior level, they have basically the same level of experience as you do, and the projects basically look similar, same kind of features as the ones that you have, like why should that person choose you and not someone else? And the problem is that you kind of just blend in with the noise. You just blend in with everybody else. And so it's really important that you put yourself in your employer's shoes and just keep asking yourself, why should they hire me over someone else? You also have to realize that you have very little time to impress someone with your resume. Like when people are reviewing resumes, they review them very, very quickly. They're not going to sit there and go through every little minutia and detail. They're basically just skimming them. I'm guilty of this. We all do it. When you have a dozen resumes to look at, you're just skimming them to look at, oh, do they have basic requirements? You might open up their portfolio, click on a couple projects, and then that's done. You have maybe less than 30 seconds, and that's putting a stretch on it. Sometimes it's even less than 10. Like you can size someone up pretty quickly. And so you need to make sure that whatever you've got on there and all your projects are the best that they possibly can be. Another thing you need to be thinking about is that every project you put on your resume or every project you put in your portfolio is a potential first impression for someone else. So if you're putting forth stuff that is kind of half baked and doesn't look very good or doesn't work very well, and that's the first thing that someone sees, they're probably not going to want to talk to you, or they definitely are not going to want to hire you because that's the first impression that you're presenting to them. And first impressions are very, very powerful. And if you give off a bad first impression, it can be very difficult in order to kind of make up for that later on. And most people don't really get a second chance if you give them a bad first impression. It's really rare in my experience to find a junior developer or a new developer who really goes the extra mile and puts in the extra effort and puts in the work. And the whole point of why I'm making this video is because you need to be that person. You need to be the person who does go the extra mile, who does put in the extra work, and does really, really care about quality. If you're willing to just put in that little bit of extra work and make sure that your stuff is just a little bit more polished and has a little bit more quality to it, you will set yourself apart from so many other developers because virtually no one really does this. The vast majority of people, when they put out their little portfolio pieces and projects, they kind of just put something together and then it looks like they just quit after a little while and it's just kind of half baked and just sitting there. If you actually go the distance and go put in the the little bit of extra work, couple hours or whatever extra work, make sure it looks really nice, make sure that it's responsive, make sure that it functions well, you check it out on your phone and it looks good. That's going to set you apart in a huge, huge way from everyone else. And I don't mean to say that it has to be perfect because there's no such thing as perfect. And no one expects perfection. Like, we understand that you're a junior, you're very new, this is your first job, your second job. We know you don't have a lot of experience, you don't have a lot of skills yet. We're not expecting like some amazing portfolio piece and just be actually blown away by something. Like, we're pretty reasonable in what our expectations are, but you have to remember that each one of these projects is potentially telling your employer of like, this is what I'm capable of doing. And as a junior developer, at least here in the United States, you could potentially make anywhere from $50 to like $80,000 a year as a brand new dev, and that's a lot of money. And if you're putting forth projects that don't really represent that need of a salary, then like, why should an employer be willing to pay you $50 to $80,000 for this? Like, if it's just some mediocre half-baked project, you're telling your employer that you're kind of like a mediocre, kind of like a not very good, and you're definitely not going to be worth $50 to $80,000 a year, because the employer wants to know, like, can this person do the job, and what am I getting by giving them all this money? So that's something that's really important, and you need to keep in mind. You need to justify these really, really high salaries. And so now that I've kind of covered a little bit about the problem and like what you need to be thinking about here, I want to talk about some practical ways of how you actually do stand out in your resume and in your portfolio pieces and things like that. So the big takeaway from this video, if you take away nothing else, is the word initiative. In my opinion, the best way to show your potential employer and to stand out from everyone else is to show initiative. Companies want to hire people who take initiative. So how exactly do you go about like demonstrating this? Well, the first thing, and what I think is probably like the lowest barrier to entry, it's something that everyone should be doing, but virtually no one really does, and this is why you should be doing it, is you should start a blog and write content about everything that you're learning. The reason why is because this is going to demonstrate that you know how to write and how to communicate well. And even if you don't know how to write and communicate well, it'll give you the opportunity to practice writing, to practice communicating, and you're just going to get better and better and better. It'll also demonstrate that you are able to think clearly and explain concepts in a way that is easily understandable. So this will also demonstrate that you can take complex problems and break them down and explain them to people who are not as technically minded as you are. And this is absolutely massive. And so many developers, especially new developers, don't really realize what it's like once you actually get that job and you start working. You are going to be working with people who are not technical all the time. You're going to be dealing with designers, you're going to be dealing with project managers, you're going to be dealing with even salespeople and business people, and even people who are like vice presidents, C-level, C-suite people. All of these kinds of people who, most of them by and large, are not technically minded. They're not developers. They don't read and write code every day like you do. So how do you take these complicated problems that are very technical, and how do you explain them to people like in marketing, for existence, who have no idea what you're talking about, or designers who don't have no idea what you're talking about? So by writing and learning and developing those skills, not only will it make you stand out and prove initiative, but it's also going to give you like a crazy leg up once you actually get in there and get your job, because you'll be able to interface and interact with all these non-technical people, probably better than most. Another thing that's really, really huge is you need to get involved in open source like immediately, as early on as you possibly can. So many people ask me, how do I get experience when I'm trying to get my first job? And they really wrestle with this, and you have this amazing opportunity to where you have tens of thousands of projects out there for you to get experience from for free. All you have to do is find an issue and get involved and start working on a project. So that demonstrates initiative in a very, very big way. It demonstrates that you know how to collaborate and work with other developers. It demonstrates your knowledge of Git. It shows that you know how to take initiative because you went out and saw a project, you saw a problem, and you went out and solved it. And then also, open source is probably the best way to get like legitimate real world experience of what you'll be doing on the job, because basically everything that you're going to be doing in GitHub, you will be doing on the job. So you will be pulling down repos, you will be editing code, you will be making commits, you will be pushing up that code, you will be opening PRs, and then you will be commenting and discussing your PR with other people back and forth. And that's literally what you do day in and day out as a developer. So that is a huge way. And I know a lot of people get intimidated, especially early on. It was like, I don't know enough. I don't know how to get involved in this project. But the easiest way for you to get involved in open source is to just like start fixing typos in documentation websites. As you come across a typo or some kind of grammatical issue or something in like a documentation website of a tool that you're using, if you see something that's not working or that's spelled correctly or something like that, just open up a PR and make a change. There's no code involved at all. And it's like super easy for you to do that. And then that it actually gets your feet wet. And then you get more and more comfortable doing open source. And then you can start like tackling some of those more complicated problems that involve writing code and implementing features and fixing bugs and things like that. Basically, when you're creating content like this, that's kind of outside of just the day-to-day writing code and building projects kind of situation, a lot of people think, and early developers think like, oh, they just need to be code projects and things like that. But when you're creating this other kind of content around the code and the technologies and things like that, companies really like seeing that because, again, it demonstrates initiative and hardly anyone does anything like this. And another thing that's really powerful when you do this is that it gives these people and potential employers an opportunity to quote unquote like get to know you rather than like just being some random person on a resume or something like that. Because when they read your content or they watch your videos or they read your blog posts and things like that, they kind of subconsciously are getting a feel for you and your personality, and they kind of start developing a little bit of a relationship with you, and they start to feel like they already kind of know you just a little bit. And this is really, really powerful because now they are more likely to reach out and talk to someone that they know rather than just like a stack of random people in a pile of resumes over here. They can kind of get the sense like, oh, I like this person. I like the way they communicate. I like the way that they're, and it might not even be a very conscious thing. It's just kind of working in the background, but it gives you that like little bit of an edge or a leg up compared to everyone else. You also have to realize that when you get started doing this, like this is not going to be perfect. And that's totally okay. Like no one expects perfection, but people will still respect you and appreciate you doing it in the first place because it really shows your drive, your desire, and your passion. And what really matters, again, and I keep saying it again and again and again in this video, is that no one else really does this stuff. And because you do, this is going to set you apart in a very, very big way from all the other people that you're competing against trying to get this job. And so I've kind of shared a little bit about like some of the problems and why I think it's important to stand out and how to do it. And now I want to share some of my own personal experience with this so that you just don't think that I'm just making this stuff out of thin air. I'm telling you all this because this is stuff that I've done over my career and it's been incredibly powerful and valuable. Real quick, I just want you to know I'm not trying to brag. I'm not trying to boast at all. That's not my desire for sharing this information. I'm simply trying to share with you my own personal firsthand experience with doing these types of things and how it's impacted and affected my career. So recently I was talking with a buddy of mine named Kevin, who I used to work with at Cypress. He was sharing some notes with me that he came across in his notebook of when he was actually interviewing me for the job. So my personal site, which is howtocode.io, he said that when he saw that site, I immediately jumped to the top of the list than all the other people who are applying for this position. As soon as he saw it, he said, I went immediately to the front line and he reached out to me. And the reason why he did that is because it demonstrated initiative. I had already proved to him that I was capable of doing the work that he was trying to hire me for, because it was literally all right in front of him to see. When someone's interviewing you and they're hiring you for a position, like the number one thing that they're concerned about is, can this person do the job that I need them to do? And by having all of this content out there, I'm literally demonstrating to them, yes, here, I already know how to do it. I already know how to communicate well. I already know how to use all these various technologies because I'm teaching people on my website how to do it. I have all these courses, I have all these books and all these other things. And like you won't necessarily be at that point. It took me a very long time, over 8 years, to build up all of this stuff. But if you just have a handful of blog posts and you've done some open source work, I mean, that's huge because you're demonstrating that you know how to do the work because you've already done it. And so they don't really have to, like, they're less concerned and then you're less risky to them because you've already demonstrated that you know how to do the thing that they are trying to hire you to do. And so another real quick example is my second job ever that I was applying for was for this agency, and it was a fully remote position. And I had less than 2 years of experience as a developer. So I was like still super, super green and very, very junior. And I eventually got this job, but I later found out from the owner of the company that he had received over 400 applications for this position. 400, which is just seemed outrageous to me. But the difference was, at my first job, I was applying to a local company when I was living in Rhode Island, but now I'm applying to a remote company. And so they're getting applications from literally all over the world. So when you apply for these remote jobs, you're competing against people all over your country, potentially all over the globe. And so the competition is like much, 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 much higher. So you need to find a way to stand out even more. If you're not really sincere or authentic in the content that you're creating, like people can tell, and people don't like fake people. And you shouldn't be doing any of these things if you don't enjoy them. And you shouldn't be doing them just to help yourself and just to stand out. If you're really doing it to only help yourself, people can tell and they can smell that like a mile away. And instead of it helping you, it's actually probably going to hurt you. So your motivation should always be to help other people. And as a consequence of helping other people, it will help you stand out and it'll help you further on in your career. But make sure that your heart's in the right place and that you genuinely want to help other people. So that's it for this video, guys. If you're new here, I create videos and tutorials on web development and helping people get their first job. So I would love to have you join the How to Code community. So click that subscribe button, and I'll have some links down below too where you can get more involved. And so I'll see you in the next one, friends. Cheers.